Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well, and welcome to the first video here in my new apartment. If you saw my review for Warfare, which was my last video, you'll know that I talked about that being my last video in that apartment that I had been living in and making content in the last like 3 years and some change. So here we are in the new apartment. As you can see, things are still all over the place. We have not unpacked fully. It's a disaster in here in a lot of ways. And over the course of the next couple weeks, I will start to kind of set up where I'm going to be filming properly as I figure out what's the best place for lighting and all that jazz. But I just got home from an early screening from the Florida Film Festival for a new A24 film, and I wanted to talk about it as soon as I can. And that film is called The Legend of Ochi. This is the writing and directorial debut of Isaiah Saxon and stars people like Helena, Zengel, Willem, Dafoe, Emily Watson, Finn Wolfhard, and many more. And as usual, if you guys are a fan of early reviews like this, as well as retrospective reviews, up-to-date reviews, live streams, and the occasional vlog, then consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button because it really helps me grow, and I'd love to see you come back. But if you're a returning viewer, well, thank you so much for taking the time to come back once again to hear me rant about another movie. And today, like I already mentioned, we're talking about the writing and directorial debut of Isaiah Saxon, who has done short films before this, but this is his first full-length film coming from A24, called The Legend of Ochi. And as usual, before we get into my thoughts on the film, let's get into what this movie is all about. The Legend of Ochi focuses on a young girl named Yuri, played by Helena Zengel, who finds herself in an unconventional relationship with a small primate known as an Ochi, but we learn pretty quickly into the film that the townspeople that live around the forest that these Ochi live in do not like these creatures. They view them as violent, dangerous creatures, and specifically Yuri's father, played by Willem Dafoe, has a lot of animosity towards these creatures as he blames the disappearance of his wife on the Ochi. You also have the brother in this situation being played by Finn Wolfhard, and Willem Dafoe and Finn Wolfhard are part of a group of individuals as well as a bunch of young men who go out into the woods trying to track down the Ochi. But when Yuri finds herself with one of the babies of the Ochi, she takes it upon herself to try to get this young Ochi back to its family, even if everybody else says that's a bad idea. And I'll start this off by saying that one thing immediately that I thought while I was watching the film, and everybody I spoke to at the screening thought, and it's something I think a lot of people in general are going to think, is that this is a film that's very reminiscent of E.T. Of course, you have a young kid taking on a young creature that everybody else, specifically the adults, say is dangerous, that they should not have this bond with this creature, who of course goes on this adventure with this cute, cuddly creature. But that's not a bad comparison because I love E.T. and while this film is not on the same level as E.T. for me, I love the fact that it very much felt like a modern day E.T. I really enjoyed this film. I found it to be a great time. Visually, this film is just a feast for the eyes. I absolutely love the cinematography of the film. There's a great use of practical effects in this film, specifically around the Ochi. That was something that pulled me in immediately. I'm a sucker for incredible good puppeteering work as well as animatronics and just practical costumes in general. And when they sent over some of the press images that I could use for my review, and I saw the behind the scenes pictures of this, that you see those practical costumes and practical puppets for the Ochi in this film, I thought that it was absolutely stunning, and it looks incredible in the film as well. Throughout the entirety of the film, outside of a couple of moments in the dark when these creatures have to move quickly, and outside of a couple of moments of background and some fire you see in a couple of sequences, majority of this film is done in camera. And when there are moments that are enhanced by the CGI, a lot of times you can tell it was an intentional approach to have the film kind of have this surreal kind of look to the film. There was something about its style that very much felt like a dark, grimy folklore film, as well as very much feeling like a fairy tale. And I think that the overall aesthetic of this film is incredibly pleasing to the eye. I love the cinematography, the use of fog, the sets, the locations, the costume designs, the animatronics and puppeteering, as I already mentioned, as well as just so much about this film in terms of lighting and all that stuff. Immediately, visually, this film was striking to me. Outside of that as well, you also have a fantastic musical score that elevated the material here for me, without a doubt, and very much made this film feel, not only in its narrative and in its tone, but also with its music, like a film that would have come out in the 80s or in the early 90s. It very much felt like a movie that was a throwback to a different era that was able to be really elevated by the fact that it's using modern filmmaking tools that just made the film look and feel so much better. In a lot of ways, this is a film, like I said before, that is familiar. I used E.T. as an example, but we have seen this premise done in other films with a young kid taking on this young creature or a creature of some sort that they hide away from people and they go on this fun adventure. And I think in a lot of ways, this film definitely pulls from those great films that have come before it to definitely tell tell a unique and interesting story here, and that's exactly what you have here with The Legend of Ochi. Something that feels unique, something that has an eclectic vibe to it, something that very much feels like it has its own identity, even though it does pull from familiar story beats that we've seen in other things before. Overall, I do think that the performances here as well are really great, specifically from the young girl Yuri, played by Helena Zengel. She's definitely asked a lot of in the script. She definitely has to kind of ham it up. She's the one character in the mix who doesn't really connect with everybody else's views of the Ochi. So immediately you know that she's not really one who's going to be in line with everybody else. She's definitely the rebellious one of the bunch. She feels disconnected, and she also is a bit of a weird character herself. So when she finds this young Ochi who she's kind of spending time with, he's an outsider and she herself is an outsider, and the two are able to relate in these really fun, cute, kind of weird ways. This is a weird film, and I think that's something that people should know going into it, because I think it's really going to depend on your tolerance for weird and whether or not you're going to enjoy this film, because there are sequences in this film that are funny or really enjoyable to watch, but definitely have their toes completely steeped in weirdness. And for me, I'm a huge fan of weird. I love when a film can say, hey, listen, we're going to commit to a level of weird that's not for everybody, but if it is for you, you're really going to enjoy this. And I found myself completely engrossed in the level of weird that this film was. I found that the story, for the most part, was really, really engaging. And I think what's interesting about the story is that it's not a very overly dialogue-centric film. A lot of it is done through visual storytelling. A lot of it is done through these small, cute moments between characters, most notably, of course, Yuri and this young Ochi. But I think for the most part, this is a film that very much relies on concept and on silliness and weirdness to get across its story, less so than dialogue-centric stuff. Outside of the young girl who plays Yuri, though, of course, you got Willem Dafoe in here, so you already know you're going to get a great performance from him, and I do think he gives a great performance here. There are some of those great over-the-top Willem Dafoe moments, and when you look at the kind of things he's chosen to do in his career in recent years, I would say specifically maybe like the last 5 to 6 years, this film very much feels in line with a lot of those very eccentric and very absurd performances that he's given in the past few years, even down to the vocal performance he's giving in this movie as well. I really enjoyed Willem Dafoe in here. Finn Wolfhard was enjoyable in the film, but I don't necessarily know that he was given an abundance to do in this film, but it was nice to see him, and I do think the part he plays is integral, specifically around the relationship with his sister Yuri and kind of his viewpoint on the things going on with the Ochi. There's definitely something that this film has to say about the notion of an elder, in the case of Willem Dafoe, kind of spreading a prejudice towards the younger generation as he leads this group of individuals going out after the Ochi. You have all these kids who just believe him. They believe that these Ochi are these dangerous creatures, and it's kind of about the journey of seeing, you know, a different side to things. This is a classic tale of being able to kind of have two different sides that maybe fear one another or have a specific outlook on one another, who are able to kind of build a bond. And of course, we see that specifically through Yuri and Ochi. I really enjoyed their camaraderie. There are some really weird and silly scenes between these two characters, specifically a scene where they're eating bugs. I won't say much more about it, but there's a scene between the character of Yuri and this young Ochi that was pretty audibly getting a lot of laughs in the theater that I was in, simply because of how silly it all was and how much they executed on that weirdness. But I do think it's that weirdness and the fact that they committed to it that gave this film its own charm, its own endearing quality. And so, yeah, with all that said, I found The Legend of Ochi to be one of the most unique films to come from A24, even if it does feel familiar to something like E.T. and the various films that are kind of within that bracket. I think it does a lot to differentiate itself. I think when it comes down to the musical score, the practical effects, it's an incredibly well-made film with a charming, unique energy to it that very much gives it its own identity and ultimately feels like a movie that feels fresh this year. You know, I think in a world where we have so many sequels and so many big franchise things that have been disappointing people across the board, it's nice to see a movie like this come out that maybe it's not going to do the biggest numbers in the box office, but it's the kind of movie that somebody can walk out of and be like, I'm glad I saw that because of just how weird it was. They went for it with this film. It didn't feel conventional. I will say the only thing that felt conventional to me was the ending. It felt like a bit of a safe, conventional ending. And in terms of my biggest gripes, I would say there are moments in the second act where the film does feel like it slows down a little bit too much. And there are a handful of characters in the film that I don't feel get enough characterization for me to have ever felt super emotionally connected to everybody in the film. But where I did find myself emotionally connected was with the character of Yuri and this young Ochi. Maybe not as connected as I did with Elliot and E.T., but that's just a completely different kind of movie. And I don't think it's fair to compare, even if I do see the similarities. But I think for the most part, what you have here with The Legend of Ochi is an incredibly unique film that has its own identity, that commits to being weird, that if you are into weird movies, I think this is the kind of movie that's going to be on your wavelength, and it was certainly on mine. So that's going to be my thoughts on The Legend of Ochi. Looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Are you planning on checking this film out, or have you checked out an early screening and that's what brought you to this review? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below. I want to hear what you guys have to say about this film. I'm curious to see what the divide of this film is going to be for many people. But with all that said, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Hopefully in the next time I'm filming here, things will be a little bit more put together, and hopefully start to find where's the best place to film. But thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you all, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.